It's a complicated issue. But we do complicated issues on this show. Joining me now is a guest with 25 years of experience in housing policy. Jenny Schuetz is the Vice President of Infrastructure for Housing at Arnold Ventures, where she oversees efforts to identify and enact policies that can successfully expand housing supply and make it easier to build more and different types of housing. She also served as the principal economist for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. She's the author of the book, Fixer Upper, How to Repair America's Broken Housing Systems. Jenny, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, look, I bit off a lot there. There's a lot to talk about here. My large point is we've got a real problem with housing, and it's got no easy fix from the federal government. Donald Trump talks a lot about mortgage rates need to go down. That's one relatively small part of the problem.
That's right. I mean, fundamentally, the U.S. hasn't built enough homes to keep up with demand for about 15 years, going back to the Great Recession. We just aren't building enough homes to keep up with population and job growth, especially in the places where people most want to live. This problem has been building for actually decades in places like California and New York and Boston. But we have really seen in the last 5 years that this has spilled over from being a blue coastal city problem to being an almost everywhere problem. Cities like Austin and Nashville and Denver that historically have built a lot of housing and been very affordable have become less affordable and are just having trouble keeping up with in-migration. And as you pointed out, some of the Mountain West states, places like Montana and Idaho and Wyoming, have also seen a huge surge in demand and are really having trouble providing housing for essential workers in those communities. And I think it's really important to remember this is not just an abstract problem. This is about 24-year-olds not being able to move out of their parents' house and live independently, people not being able to buy their first home, essential workers not being able to live in the communities where they work.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? Because there are people who think, so what? You live in a place like New York or San Francisco, the housing's expensive in the city, but as you get farther out, the housing's cheaper, and why can't people just live farther out? But being able to live farther out depends on a lot of other things that we also don't do in some of these growing centers that you mentioned, including public transit. Just hard to get to work. You want everybody to have to drive in 2 hours, then you've got a car problem, then you've got an emissions problem, you've got a gas problem.
Exactly. And everybody likes to complain about traffic and congestion, but the truth is most of us are part of the traffic. And when we build most of our housing far away from jobs, from services, from shops, then we get more traffic congestion problems. The other issue is that where people live really affects the kinds of services they have. So families with kids would love to be able to live in some of the neighborhoods that have great public school systems, that have parks and access to open space. But a lot of those really desirable communities have make it very hard for renters to live there. They ban apartments, and so you have to be able to buy a single family house in order to access all of the great public services in the community.
So talk to me about this, because it's such a big issue that people face, and yet the solutions are, I don't want to say small, but they're very local. So it may be appealing to listen to a presidential candidate tell you how they're going to solve the housing problem, but actually they're not.
That's right. The solutions are going to have to come from state and local governments. So if we think about two different kinds of regulations that would be very helpful to change, one is just making it easier to build homes of all shapes and sizes. More than 3/4 of our land is set aside exclusively for single-family detached homes on yards. And so that's setting the bar awfully high for people to be able to buy or rent, allowing things like accessory dwelling units in backyards, duplexes, townhouses, apartment buildings close to transit and jobs. Those kinds of changes to zoning laws would help diversify the housing stock and make it possible for people to choose the kind of structure they want to live in and have the freedom to live in the communities they want without having to buy a big house. The second kind of change is thinking about the process of development. Lots of communities require things like an environmental impact review, design review to make sure that houses fit in with the character of the neighborhood, site plan review, historic preservation. And all of these kinds of reviews and processes come from initially good reasons, but when you layer them on top of one another, it's just too complicated, too expensive, and takes too long to build housing.
Yeah, so this is tricky, though, because people live in places and they say, I'd like to maintain the rough character of this. And when you reduce some of these planning requirements, you do end up in some cases favoring commercial developers or the wealthy who want to take. How do you manage that, right? How do you manage there are too many rules here, but there should be some rules in planning and zoning that don't make everything a free-for-all?
So earlier you mentioned Montana's new land use plan, and I think that's a really good example of a way to keep some local input in the process, but also be forward-looking and make it less complicated and less onerous. So what Montana has required is that the larger cities have to plan for housing over the next 5 years, so anticipate the new population growth or job growth, make sure that their land use plans accommodate enough growth for those next 5 years, put those plans in place, and then allow development to go forward that conforms with the new rules. So they'll keep updating this, and the community is involved with coming up with the new plans and the new zoning, but the community doesn't get to show up on Tuesday night and complain about every apartment building and every accessory dwelling unit that a homeowner wants to build in their backyard.
Jenny, great conversation. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Jenny Schuetz is the Vice President of Infrastructure and Housing at Arnold Ventures and the author of Fixer Upper, How to Repair America's Broken Housing Systems.